Media's page on Facebook and follow us at Accessible Media on Twitter.
This is AMI Audio Live, bringing community events closer to you.
Hello and welcome to the 6th Annual International Day of Persons with Disabilities Conference. Today's theme, Empowering Ourselves, Thriving in This New Reality. Hello, my name is Jay Gupta. I'm the host and producer of The Pulse on AMI Audio, but I'm also delighted to be a co-host of this afternoon's events. It promises to be a jam-packed conference. You've got great speakers and panelists coming up and an opportunity to discuss and have conversations about the issues that matter to all of us as people with disabilities. Not only is this conference available virtually via Zoom, but you can also tune in over AMI Audio. However you are joining us, welcome to this space. We are delighted to have you. And as with a number of different events, we open today's conference with a land acknowledgement offered by Melanie Marston, who is both Indigenous and blind. Melanie, welcome, and thank you so much for acknowledging the space and opening our conference. Over to you.
Miigwech. Ane Sego. Hello. As an Indigenous person that is blind, I have been taught by elders and scholars to introduce ourselves and where we come from, honoring indigeneity. Introducing myself identifies my positionality, where honoring my traditions and culture. My name is Dabawe Wanisque Kui. She carries the light woman, which was given to me by Elder James Carpenter from Anishinaabe Health Toronto. My colonial name is Melanie Marsden. I am registered with Alderville First Nation Reserve, Ojibwe, my father's people. We are Bear Clan. I am also Mohawk, identifying with the Six Nation Reserve where my mother's people come from. Six Nation is near Brantford, Ontario. We are a Turtle Clan. Because I am white passing, which means I don't look Indigenous except for my high cheekbones, it's important for you to know where I am registered and where my ancestors come from. I am recognizing that we are gathering today on Native land, much of it unceded. I am currently in Toronto or Takaranto on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit First Nation. I encourage you to take a moment to give gratitude and honor the land you are on, and consider learning the name of the territory you live on. Today, I am honored to open International Day of Persons with Disabilities Conference, Empowering Ourselves, where living in this new reality. I am holding tobacco in my left hand and will put it on the land in gratitude, in celebration of International Day of People with Disabilities, and also to honor the relationships that have been built, including allies, and that the relationship building will carry on in the conference with the celebrations. And I reflect on all the work that AEBC has done for community, especially with empowering ourselves, thriving in this new reality. Miigwech.
Okay, thank you very much, Melanie. Good afternoon once again, and welcome to the 6th Annual International Day for Persons with Disabilities Conference, hosted by the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians and partner organizations. My name is Minette Samaru, and I'm the president of the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians Toronto chapter and project lead of this conference. I will now like to introduce our MC, who will be taking us through the different segments of the conference today. Anne Burden King is a journalist whose writing on disability and patients' rights appears in the New York Times, Best Health, Healthy Debate, and the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism, among other publications. She is the host of Non-Compliant, and a neurodiversity podcast, and co-founder of Autistic for Autistic, a Canadian autistic rights group. Anne lives in Toronto. Welcome, Anne, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Minette, and hello to everyone. Thank you to everyone, and we're so glad that you could make it to the International Day for Persons with Disabilities conference entitled Empowering Ourselves, Thriving in the New Reality. It's great to see so many people here, and I wanted to mention that thanks to Joeita Gupta for speaking and to Melanie Marsden for the powerful land acknowledgement. This event is hosted by the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians and partner organizations, and we will talk more about the host, our sponsors, and our partners, as well as all our project partners a little bit later in the conference. I first want to acknowledge everyone on the organizing committee who's made this such a great event today, including Elizabeth Novak, Jonathan Pezian-Zadeh, Christine Zanier, Ian White, Eric Weir, Sarah Saeed, Minette Samaru, Marcy Yale, and everyone else who has been helpful in getting everything arranged, including all of our speakers, as well as our CART service provider, Denise, and our 2 sign language interpreters, Alex and Savannah. I have a few Zoom housekeeping notes before we commence, and I'm going to paste these into the chat window as soon as I've finished stating them so people can reference them back. First, we're going to use the raised hand option. When you want to speak, you can raise or lower your hand on a Mac by using Option Y. If you're on a Windows PC, you can raise your hand by using Alt Y and by finding the raise hand button in the smartphone app. You can also find the raise hand button under the little smiley face that says reactions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have dialed in by phone, *9 will both raise or lower your hand. We're also going to ask members to keep the mute button on during presentations, unless you've been called on. You can mute or unmute on a Mac using Command-Shift-A. On a Windows PC, you can unmute or mute using Alt-A. And on a smartphone, you can locate the mute-unmute button in the app under maybe More or in other places. If you've dialed in by phone, *6 mutes and unmutes. As well, there's a mute button in the bottom right corner of your Zoom screen. If you're having technical difficulties where the signal is breaking up, you're having a tough time hearing people or being, able to kind of get through, sometimes it helps to turn off your camera and just go to audio until the problem clears itself up, if that's possible. Our chat box, as always, is open, and I'm sure it will be a vibrant space for people to connect as well as asking their questions. Jonathan will be monitoring the chat box throughout the sessions, and he will be reading out comments to the group throughout the conference. So if you have questions or comments for speakers, put them in the chat. Finally, we will be taking breaks from 1:50 to 2 p.m. and from 2:30 to 2:40 p.m. We'll have some poetry and music during these breaks as well. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, David Lepofsky. He's appearing via video, and he'll be giving opening remarks in just a moment. David Lepofsky is a visiting professor of disability rights and legal education at Osgoode Hall Law School and chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. He's also a member of the Education Standards Development Committee appointed by the Ontario government. I'd like to welcome David, and I'm going to ask now that Marcy play David's video, and we can all read and listen.
And I've just put a link in the chat. Once we get our captionings going, then the stream text link is now in the chat. And so now I'm going to try and get this video going just a moment.
You unmute from the currently muted Carrie New WND. Live transcription experiment left captioning microphone. Zoom 1 column 2. One reminder experiment Windows Media Player to now play. Stop tape.
Hey, this is David Lepofsky. I'm the chair of the Accessibility for
Participants can now see your
Ontarians
screen
with
alert.
Disabilities Act Alliance. I want to thank you for including me in your event today, and let me chime in on our theme today of advocacy. Advocacy is where we can go from feeling frustrated about the world around us to making a difference to make that world a better place. I'm going to give you an example of when to do it, where to do it, and how to do it. And spoiler alert, the when to do it is right now. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities in Canada live in poverty. Our social safety net does not ensure that they can escape poverty. Now, the good news is that the federal government 2 years ago announced that they were going to create a new Canada Disability Benefit to strengthen our social safety net, to lift people with disabilities out of poverty. And it's great that the federal government introduced a bill to achieve this called Bill C-22. The problem is the bill is far too weak. What's wrong with it? Well, for one thing, it doesn't actually give people with disabilities any rights at all. It doesn't ensure that there will be a Canada Disability Benefit. It doesn't set a time when it has to be created by. It doesn't ensure that it will be large enough to actually lift people with disabilities out of poverty. It actually gives all the powers over all of this to Cabinet. Cabinet decides when it'll be paid, if at all, who will be eligible to get it, how much it'll be, and so on. And what one cabinet does, the next cabinet can undo. All
Yeah, that
in
Windows
secret
just.
secret meetings with no votes in the House of Commons. Well, that's pretty bad. Making that even worse, making that much worse, it
I know
actually
it's hard
will
because
actually
I've got to suffer
cut
so fast
out
about as hard as I
Canada disability benefit, disqualifies almost a third of people with disabilities
that
over
wind.
the age of 15, because it only allows the benefit to be paid
You
to
don't have
working age people. But folks, disability poverty doesn't end at age 65. We need the House of Commons to fix this bill. We want it passed quickly, but first we want them to quickly fix it. Well, why is the time now for action? Because the House of Commons Standing Committee that held public hearings this past month, it's going to be voting on amendments on December 14th, was what we hear, in the next couple of weeks. So we need you right now to email, or if you're on Twitter, to tweet to key members of Parliament with a simple message: please strengthen Bill C-22. How do you know who to write? How do you know what their email addresses are? We got you covered. The AODA Alliance has a whole webpage devoted to Bill C-22. I'm going to give you the link to it right now. If you go to there, you'll see a call to action with all the names, the email addresses, the Twitter handles. Here comes. It's www.aodaalliance.org/C22. So let's do that again. It's aodaalliance.org/C22. You'll see a call to action. Click on it. Everything you need is there. Now, some people are being, well, let's put it this way: the federal government is trying to get people to think that, oh, we can't amend this bill, that'll slow things down. But we think that this bill specifics is going to take the pockets
What is
of
that?
disabilities. We'll strengthen it, we'll speed it up. For example, we'd like an
There's
amendment
something.
to set a time the payments have to start flowing. That'll get the pressure on the government to get their act together and get it done. But all you got to say to politicians when you email them or tweet them is, please strengthen Bill C-22. And let me end with just an easy way you can help out. If you're on Twitter, follow us at AODA Alliance, at AODA Alliance. And all you got to do is retweet our tweets. We're tweeting every single day to politicians about this. So by clicking retweet on any of our tweets, you're adding your voice to ours. We think that people with disabilities deserve a disability rights bill, a bill that gives us rights. We think people with disabilities deserve better than the wording of C-22 as it's written now. This is your chance to engage in advocacy right away and to help make a real difference. And that's what advocacy is all about. Happy December 3rd, and wishing you all the best.
Yeah, the wind is really playing havoc. Whoop, we lost the feed there.
Hey, this is David Lepofsky. I'm the chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. I want to thank you for including me in your event today.
I muted it.
Let me chime in on our
Apologies, there is someone who is unmuted, and I've been looking for you, but I just can't find you. So Elizabeth, can you just quickly look down the list and turn that and mute the person who currently is unmuted, because thank you. Perfect. Great. All right. Apologies for that. I hope it didn't make the video too unhearable. Is that a word?
Inaudible.
Inaudible. Yeah, that's probably better. Okay, I'm going away now.
Hi, everybody. I'm back, your MC. And thank you very much to David Lepofsky for that informative video about action that we can take. I want to mention before I introduce our next speaker that today is the International Day of Disabled Persons that was proclaimed in 1992 by the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 47-3. On this day, the United Nations set about to aim to promote the rights and well-being of persons with disabilities in all spheres of society and development, and to increase awareness of the situation of persons with disabilities in every aspect of political, social, and cultural life. Building on many, many decades of their work, including the conventions on the rights of persons with disabilities, which was later adopted in 2006. So while we do have a lot of work to do, we also can take this moment to celebrate the recognition by the UN of the importance of this work. I'd like to hand it over to our next speaker, Sandhya Rao. Sandhya is Vice President of the iBlind Users Group, or iBug Today, which promotes independence, social integration, and educational development of the blind through accessible technology training. Sandhya received her law degree from Stanford and now works as a staff attorney in the United States District Court in Texas. Please give a warm welcome to Sandhya.
All right. Thank you, Anne, and thank you, everyone. I am so honored. I can't tell you how pleased and excited I am to be a part of this wonderful event, and want to get started by, we're talking about empowering ourselves and empowering each other. And I was going to begin by telling you a little bit about myself. So I was born with a rare brittle bone condition called osteopetrosis, and it is caused by too much calcium. You would think calcium is a good thing, but no, not too much is not good. So as a result, my bones break very easily. And so Through the years, I've broken nearly all of my major long bones, and so they put some plates and screws to stabilize them. And well, my brother would probably tell you I have a few screws loose in other places, but we won't go there. So I would first start by saying that the plates and screws have empowered me because I can now move forward free of pain and move forward and do the things that I want to do. What do I want to do? As I was going through school when I was very young, I started learning, I was reading large print and it was very slow. And then my teacher said, "Hey, I think your daughter needs to learn Braille." And I was a stubborn kid and I'm too cool to learn Braille. But my father actually learned Braille first and really made it a point for me to learn. And thank goodness he did. And that paved the way for me to reach my goals in so many ways. So I am so grateful. And so the second one would be Braille. Braille has empowered me. Then I would tell you a little bit about my family. My dad and mom came from India, and my dad was pursuing higher education, doing his PhD at the University of Kentucky. Came here to this country with $30 in his pocket and, following the American dream. And so he believed in dreaming big and moving forward. And, as a child, I never heard that there was anything that I couldn't do. So I was always encouraged to follow my heart. And that is why I feel like I'm just so empowered by such an awesome family, very supportive brother and sister as well. Then I moved as time, going through school and high school. As I said, I learned Braille, and my parents were like, "Well, she's got to take, science classes just like everybody else, geometry, chemistry, and all that. You're not getting a pass just because it's not in Braille. So we'll Braille it. If it's not in Braille, we'll have it Brailled." And they were just absolutely insistent that, that I had that exposure and that experience. And I'm not really sure. I'm wondering if they were secretly hoping that I would become a brain surgeon, but I don't know. They won't confirm or deny it. So I don't know. But um, so that was the high school experience. And then I went to Rice University, which is a very small liberal arts college here in Houston, Texas. And there I studied psychology and behavioral science. And it is a beautiful school, beautiful architecture, but not very accessible. So I learned at that point to really start advocating for myself. Talking to registrars like, please don't put the put the class in that mech lab or whatever. There are different buildings at Rice, and because they were not accessible. And then working with professors to get my exams to they couldn't provide them to me in Braille. So what did they do? They read them to me, and I'm like, I can't. Looking back, I don't know how I did it, but the professor is reading you the question, and it's probably thinking and you better know that one. I taught you that on week 5 or something. But they were wonderful, and so I graduated from Rice University, and then it was time to figure out what I wanted to do as a career. And well, I guess football, for obvious reasons, was kind of out of the question for me with the brittle bones. So we chose something a little safer. I thought about writing. And then my dad is like, "Well, you're always arguing. Why don't you think about law school?" And so, yes, that is how we ended. I was always the arbiter in our family solving disputes and so forth. So that's how we got to Stanford Law School. And there was a little hesitation on my part. I wasn't sure if I was ready to go all the way, wanted to go to Stanford or stay here in Texas. And then my dad's like, if I can go across the ocean to another country to follow my education, I think we can go to California. So you're going to be fine. So that is the education. Education has empowered me. Then after law school, it was time to find a job because that was the whole point, right? And I worked for a federal judge in Galveston and did all kinds of, got to watch trials, be a part of it's called an elbow law clerk, and helped draft memoranda and, watching jury trials. And it's really totally different from, LA law or all these legal shows. So it was really exciting to be in the heart of it. Law and Order, that's the one I was skipping over. And after that, got a job as a staff attorney, and that's in the federal court system. And there I do legal research and writing. I work on people who are prisoners who are challenging the validity of their conviction. For example, if they say their lawyer didn't present all of the evidence, or maybe they were not competent to enter a guilty plea, or they were coerced to enter a confession. I mean, these are all like things that we've seen on TV, the Miranda rules, Miranda rights, and so forth. That's all real stuff. And, maybe they had a subject of an illegal search or seizure. So these are all issues that we deal with. And so it's a really exciting work. I mean, I'm not, not Perry Mason, don't go to court, but everything is written. So I get to do legal research and writing. And that was the thing that I loved most, was writing. So I do write, and it's just a different form of writing. So I would say that I was empowered by my profession in the law. And then you have to think about, well, how do you navigate? How do you're doing all this stuff, but how do you get around? And because of my brittle bones, I use a power wheelchair, and I also don't really want to go tumbling down the stairs. So I use a cane. So I have a red, people would use the white cane, but my white cane is actually red, covered with ladybugs stickers. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But so that's how I navigate and go where I need to go. And I was empowered by my wheelchair and my cane. So thus empowered, I now was thinking about how do you now move on and share your situation and share your goals with others to help others. And that is what happened when I became a part of iBug, or the Eye Blind Users Group, and lovingly called iBug. And that happened about when I went to a presentation, and there was going to be this cool NASA engineer that was going to be talking about some kind of newfangled idea about an iPhone. I'm like, okay. And so he was doing all kinds of cool stuff. He was, making phone calls and, checking the weather, and goodness knows, he was doing all kinds of things with his phone. And I had my sad little flip phone, and I couldn't do very much. And so I was really excited. And several others, including myself, said, we met with him afterwards. We're like, we really want to start learning how to use that iPhone thing. And that is the genesis of iBug, and that started back in 2011. And let me tell you a little bit about that person. That engineer is Michael McCulloch, and he had the vision to see how important the iPhone was. And he's actually a NASA engineer. He worked on the space shuttle program and the International Space Station. So super cool. He's our legit rocket scientist, and just been a real, it's been a real blessing to be able to work with somebody who is so passionate about what we are doing. And you may say, what are you doing? What are we doing? So our mission is to promote the individual independence, social integration, and educational development of the blind through accessible technology. That is a mouthful, but what is the point? We want to help others get access to this technology. And that brings me to the iBug philosophy. Our philosophy is that nobody should be barred from technology because they can't afford it. So all of our services are absolutely free, no membership fees, no dues, nothing like that. Everything is free. We have all of our trainings are available on Zoom, our wonderful platform that has really brought us all together, as it has done today. And I'm going to tell you real quick, high level, about some of the programs that we have. We have a total of 21 every month, but don't worry, I'm not going to go through all of them. So we have some group trainings. We have the iBug Buzz, where we get together every Monday night and talk about the iPhone and all the related, various iPad, Apple Watches, all kinds of iOS devices, and talk about the peripherals and the operating system itself. Any question is fair game, and you get real-time answers. It's a great way to share your knowledge and help others. We have a specific time just for beginner users, so it's a real collaboration. And we very recently just celebrated our 550th call. So that is a lot of time together. And it really does begin, it is a family. I mean, I truly value my colleagues and all the people that we've gotten to meet over the years. And then we have the iBug Cafe, where we specialize. It's like a deep dive session into an app or genre of apps. For example, we could talk about OCR or GPS or podcasts, or maybe the latest operating system, all the nuances that are going to come out in the newest operating system. So it's a great way to really go in depth. We also have training on the Mac. We have a call called the Mac and Talk. And there you can ask questions about your Mac, whether you have one or want one, or how you're going to do all the different things you want to do on it. So that's the Mac class. And then we have the Android Insight, where we have a very cool platform for talking about all things related to Android, the Google platform, the Alexa devices. I don't want to say her name too loudly because who knows what will happen. And so all kinds of devices now have that Android system embedded in them. So it's a great place to get all those questions answered. For all of these programs, like I said, are conducted on Zoom. They are recorded. They are available on our website. We are also available on YouTube. You can also catch these podcasts on your favorite podcasting app. So those are the group trainings. And then we have a one-on-one jumpstart program. And that is where we match a very beginner user with one of our amazing advanced volunteer users. And let me emphasize volunteer, because iBug would be nowhere without our dedicated volunteers. Because, I mean, all of us are volunteers. Michael, we're all here because we are passionate. We care about what we're doing. We know that this technology is constantly changing, and we are going to be there to learn it and then help impart that knowledge to others, so then they can go and conquer their own barriers, right? So I talked about all the training. There's a lot of training, and then we also have fun at iBug. Social integration is one of our other pillars of our mission statement. And to that end, we have a monthly book club discussion, talk about different genre. We get out of our comfort zone, right, and try different books. And so that's always a great experience. We have different facilitators. We have a great discussion. We have, for you Trekkies out there, any Trekkies, we watch the episode ahead of time, and then we get together and discuss it. It's just always such a great discussion. People know so much about the Star Trek world, and it's just like talking about old friends and all the nuances that they bring to the discussion. And then one of our most popular events that came about because of the pandemic is iBug Night at the virtual movies. And I will have to say that is where we started really getting to meet several Canadians. We have met them. We have learned about different, we knew about, Montreal and Toronto, but now we're learning about Mississauga and Brampton and Georgetown. And so we are just we love our Canadian friends to the north. Y'all have just been so wonderful, and we value your participation on all of our calls, and we love you guys. So the movie night is we watch an audio described track and listen. And then prior to that, we have a little social time, a little silliness. We have some jokes. We have name that tune. And then after each movie, we will do a little discussion and then trivia after that. So it's a great event. We bring together several, like 50, 60 people on a regular basis, and we all just have a good time. And that's where we can have a little good time. Otherwise, we're pretty strict. We try to really maintain order out of respect to all of our callers, because I am kind of the mean one and lay down the law, shall we say. Some of our other social events, we have iBug, it's iBug's Life. It's a independent living skills program. And we have done kind of fun things like the iBug Egg Extravaganza, where we talked about everything that you can do with an egg. Who knew, right? Lots of fun stuff, and just cooking, learning about cooking. We've talked about house repairs. We've done, what else have we've talked about? Now we're going to be talking about decorating for the holidays. So that's going to be fun, and he is a blind rehabilitation teacher, and he leads that discussion for us. Then we have iBug Unplugged. That's a purely social event where we just get together and talk and get to know each other, get our other iBug members together, and just share with one another. That's a monthly event. So the social, that we have our various contact information. If you want to get more information about iBug, you can visit our website, and it's ibugtoday.org. We have a Twitter account, we have Facebook, we have, you can always email us. And I just want to share again that I'm so grateful for this opportunity to share a little bit about my journey of being empowered, and then my love for helping others reach their goals. And we just hope to meet with you, and hope you'll join us for some of our events, and look forward to meeting you. And I'd like to thank again all of the the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians and the partner organizations for inviting me, and all the people that put this amazing program together. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sandhya. I think we have some time for questions. I see a couple of raised hands, so we could do a Q&A.
Okay.
I wanted to mention that, for me, it was personally just so incredibly inspiring to hear you talk about empowerment, because it comes from that nothing about us without us perspective of making things happen, and advocacy and caring within the community for the community. And obviously the use of technology is an incredibly important part of that. I wanted to open up for some questions. So we have one hand raised. That is Joseph Cedarose. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, we know.
Hi,
Joseph.
Sandhya. This is
Hey.
Joseph. I attend your events almost every Friday,
Yeah,
and I really enjoy it. How can people get involved to volunteer?
Oh, what a great question, Joseph. Thank you. Yes, we have an application form on our, we have people who want to be a mentor. If you are right now, we have a mentoring program, like I mentioned, for the iPhone. So if you are like to help others with the mentoring program, you can fill out that application to be a mentor, and then we would match you up. So we have we have a screening process. I'm a little bit obsessive compulsive, just saying. So we like to make sure that we are all good and ready to go. So we have a process, and then once we go through that screening, we will match you up, and we would be very grateful for anybody who would like to help us. And if it's training, there's other skills that you have that you'd like to share, we would appreciate it. And I was just going to say that, about the personal issue, and you're bringing up that prior to iBug, I had never ordered a meal by myself, because I have a very protective family, like I said. And, I never went anywhere, went to work, went to school. That was about it. Pretty boring. But then, as you get the tools and the skills, then you are able to do more things on your own. And my family will tell you, ever since iBug, I'm never home. So they get on my case. But I am just so proud of it is personal. It's very personal.
Do we have other questions? People can just raise the hand and I'll call.
Yeah, there are some other questions in the chat.
And then I
This,
have one in the chat, which was sent directly to me.
yeah. Both Kirsta and Ralph both were wondering about the Zoom meeting in general. This is for Anne. They're wondering if they were able to get access to this recording after 4 p.m. and if so, how do they do so?
Okay, we can respond in the chat to that, or any other tech questions, we can respond via text in the chat. Are there any other questions for Sandhya?
Yeah. What are some disability communities has been able to adapt to the obstacle face?
Can you repeat that again real quick?
What are some ways disability communities has been able to adapt to the obstacle faces?
Okay, yes. I think technology has been a big part of that. I mean, it has helped with, in my experience. I mean, communication is key nowadays. You know, to be able to check your email, to text message. You know, nowadays nobody talks to anybody. It's all about texting, right? Being able to use FaceTime and Zoom and all these technologies that bring the world together. Well, we're there as well. I mean, we're there to teach people how to use it, and so that nobody's left out. We want to be at the table, right? So that's what I would say. Technology has been a big help for us to overcome barriers.
I see that we have 2 more questions. 2 more people have raised their hands. I can't see who has raised their hand. Could you raise your hand, unraise and raise it again?
Janet Wright and Joseph Sidor.
Okay, so we'll start with Janet.
I forgot to lower down my hand, so I
Okay.
will do that now.
All right.
Okay, well, Janet, you can unmute and ask your question anytime. Is Janet there?
Oh, sorry. I was trying to unraise my hand and so I can unmute. This is Janet from Colorado, Sonia.
Hey, Janet, glad to have you.
Congratulations on being a speaker. I just wanted to congratulate you for being a speaker, and we'll see you on Monday.
Oh, thank you so much. And like I said, it's like a family. One person's victory is everyone's victory. And we are all working together and helping each other. So we're just super, like Janet said, I am, you know, very honored to be here. And we'd love to, I wanted to mention quickly another technical issue, the Zoom. Like I said, all of our stuff is on Zoom, and it's just one Zoom link. So it makes it simpler. So you just put that into your device of choice, and then you can be at any or all of our events.
It really reminds me of the AAC community as well, the alternative and augmentative communication community for non-speakers, where Apple, you know, was initially very involved, and then Apple kind of dropped off accessibility technology for a while. This was back in the day, and then they've really picked it up again. And it's kind of interesting to see how Apple has evolved over time, even with the recent ad that they put out for the International Day of People with Disabilities, which I don't know if anyone here has heard about that ad, but it's a very, very beautiful, empowering ad about disability and accessibility and technology.
Oh, I'll have to check it out. I mean, Apple, I mean, people sometimes think that we work for Apple, but we are grateful for all the commitment that they have to accessibility. So yeah, any questions?
We got 5 more minutes, so people feel free to raise your hands, and we'll or type in the chat.
There are 3 people raised their hand. I believe I saw Nikki first.
Oh, yes. Sandhya, this is Nikki, and I think this is a wonderful organization. I haven't heard of you before. I live in San Francisco, but I've got lots of Canadian relatives in Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver.
Audio now unmuted.
But I want everybody to know what a wonderful organization iBug is. I've been involved for about 2 years. And when Sandhya talks about it being a family, we really are. But many, many families have been developed through Zoom with different organizations, and Zoom has been a wonderful thing. But I do encourage you to come to one of the meetings, because once you come to one, you'll be hooked. And it really is wonderful. And Sandia, thank you. This was a wonderful talk. And Sandia especially is absolutely amazing, and we love her dearly. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Nikki. Thank you so much. Yes, we are
Hold the audio now on mute.
very, very kind words. Thank you.
Um,
And
can you
it's
hear
not,
me?
yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Finish and then I'll see what I have to say.
Yeah, I think you're on, I think.
Yeah, okay. This is Raj from Toronto.
Uh-huh.
And I must say I enjoyed your presentation, Sonia.
Thank you.
And I know we will definitely connect in the future through your group. I've seen your group around, but I'm so involved with so many things that by the time I try to find some time, it's time to go to bed.
Yeah, we need a few more hours in the day, don't we? I agree.
Yeah. So you're doing a great job.
Thank you. And like I said, it's not just me, it's a team. We are a team.
It's a
And
team, yeah.
so we are grateful thank you for those kind words. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to see raised hands, but you can unmute if you'd like to unmute and to ask a question.
Pat.
Hey, Pat.
Hi.
everybody. Yes,
I
Michael
just-
Fair was first. His hand has been up for a while.
Hey, everybody. Yeah.
Come on, wouldn't it?
I would just like to say I really enjoyed that presentation. And yeah, if hopefully everyone knows about the guidebook I wrote for iPhone users,
Yes.
Personal Power. So hopefully that's made its way to the iBug user group. I'll be writing in because I could probably help with some of the iPhone related things that you guys are doing and just enjoy some of the others. So I will be looking at that website soon.
Yes, your book is wonderful. It's a great resource. Thank you for all your hard work and thanks for being here. Thank you.
Is there another raised hand?
Yes. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Ed. I just wanted to thank Sandia for doing such a great job. And my question is where does she get all her energy? You know which Ed this is.
I know, of course I know which Ed this is.
Okay.
My friend in Georgetown, Ed in Georgia. That's how come I know about Georgetown. Oh, Ed, you are, like I said, one of the bright lights that comes every Friday and is just wonderful. And we've developed friendships. It's not all about technology. We are human, somewhere down there. I try not to show it too much, but we really have some fun and we have developed some beautiful friendships over the years.
Do we have any other? I'm sorry, I'm unable to see people raising their hands. I'll work that out.
The next one is Chris.
Chris
E.
Hi, I have a question. Well, great talk. I have a question about, does iBug partner with other organizations to leverage and empower blind and visually impaired people?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Chris. Yes, we support, other organizations. We are all about technology and how we can, we do workshops with, we go to national and state level conferences and put on presentations about, different technologies that we think would benefit the blind community. So that's one way we collaborate. And, if there are others that, see an opportunity, I mean, we're trying to promote and let people know of our services because we're here to help and we want people to know about what we're doing. And if we can help somebody, that would be just a blessing.
It's almost break time anyway. 2 minutes to break.
Are there any other questions before we go to break? We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left.
Hey, Sandia, it's Shri.
Hey, Shri.
Yeah, I was wondering, can you share something that you experienced at Stanford that you found it was a challenge, but you were able to overcome it?
Oh, yeah. Okay. Great question. Yeah, well, I was mentioning the moot court competition and it was basically they give you an issue and then you have to argue it, throughout, you have to develop the arguments. It's
I
like
think
you're
he's
going to
sitting in
argue
this
before the
car.
Supreme
Why is
Court.
he
And so it was a lot of research and, just figuring out how you're going to do things. And so that was one, a really, it was a struggle. And then the other one was I took a trial advocacy course, and there we, like you're taking a trial, starting with interviewing clients. It's all, all pretend, but then you're taking depositions, you're conducting a trial, cross-examination, and just, learning how to think on your feet, and, being able to rely on yourself, have your notes, be prepared. It all comes down to being prepared. And so that was a real challenge, but it really, like I said, again, those challenges are what build you up, and you think, okay, well, it was hard, but I can do it. So I think that's a great question. I was going to share one other funny thing. Well, it's kind of funny. In law school, one of my least favorite courses was federal jurisdiction. Yeah, if it sounds boring, it is boring. And guess what I do on a daily basis? Federal jurisdiction comes up all the time when you're in federal court. And I have been blessed. I've been there for now 28 years. So it's a great place. So
I think we have time for one more question. Douglas Pilzer, I think, would be the next person with the hand raised. Douglas?
I have Disabilities Matter, trying to help save people. I wanted to mention, but the whole thing is we've got to change the way society looks at the disabled. That's what in my group that I'm putting together, disabled are made fun of, and all kinds of things, and people won't tell them what they think of them and everything. We've got to change the whole opinion in America.
Right. I think by each of us, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think what you're saying is we need to change the perception of disability. And I think the way we do that is we go out and live meaningful, productive lives. Don't just sit on the couch and cower. You're going to, get your ducks in a row and get out there. And every time they see me in my wheelchair and my cane, and, I'm educating somebody. That's what I think. They may think, oh my gosh, what is she doing? But they'll learn that there are people that are blind and in a wheelchair, and they're living productive lives.
Thank you so much, Sandhya, and that's a great note to end on. We're going to move to our break now. However, if people have further questions for Sandhya, you can go into the text chat, or you can also connect with Sandhya and iBug through iBug's website. Our first break will last 10 minutes and we'll go until about 2:02, I guess. During the break, we will first hear a poem written by Leroy Innes. Leroy has been an advocate and volunteer for people with disabilities for many years and is currently the chair of the Ethno-Racialized People with Disabilities Coalition of Ontario, or ERDCO. His poem will be read by Marcy Yale. Thanks, Marcy.
Thanks. And before I start, I guess I should turn my video on. There we go. I just want to clarify, I just want to make sure that all the issues with interpretation, captioning, that everything is working okay now. Can I have can the interpreters tell me if everything is going okay? Because I just read the chat. I am not a chat reader, so I just read it, and there were people talking about the fact that the interpreters couldn't pin. So is everybody okay? And I've got someone that's unmuted.
That's been resolved, Marcy, so we're good.
Okay, I didn't want to leave it because, and Denise is captioning and everything is going okay with that.
Not seeing any of the closed captioning.
You have to enable it on your end. I'm hoping it's enabled everywhere else because I assigned her.
You have to go to stream text. Use the stream text one.
You should be able to get it on the Zoom panel as well.
No, we didn't have time to set it up.
Okay, all right.
The link was provided in the chat.
Yes, I did send it there. So is everybody who needs accessibility taken care of? I just want to make sure that everything is okay. Okay, I'm not hearing any screaming, so that's a good thing. Thank you. I just, okay, so now I will read Leroy's poem, which is called Little Things. Little things, unsaid little things, misread little things. If we don't address them, little things can grow into big problems. Friends. Trustworthy friends today are few. You might have one, maybe two. If you share your secrets with a friend that isn't true, you might as well share it with the entire crew. The neighborhood's big dog. The neighborhood's big dog has a menacing growl, except when outsiders invade our territory. He turns into a cowardly fowl. Towards a unity. We are striving towards a unity that in many respects so far has been very elusive. Some members of our community have contributed only neglect. Others have given all they can give. Divided, we are from our focus distracted. Opposite poles should to each other be attracted. Join together to form a united force that can conquer any past remorse. We are striving towards a unity that will come into sight when members of our community join hands to make the work light. And Anne, what did you throw in the chat?
I just let people know that they can get information on CART by looking at the start of the chat.
Actually, that came directly to me, I think.
Oh, yeah. I sent you a note that I'm unable to see raised hands. That was the note I sent you.
Okay, I can help you with that if you like. Because I can definitely read the raised hands.
Okay, perfect. So when we get to the next section, we have a little bit more going in our break.
Yeah, we do.
Which is a musical interlude by Stealth Ing.
Nice song.
We need to find the person who has unmuted again.
Oh,
John,
God.
I think it's you, John.
Oh, yeah, it was John.
Yeah, if you could stay muted, please. It would really help everybody understand what's going on. Thank you. We've had people say in the chat that there was some distraction, so.
So I wanted to say thanks to Marcy Yale for reading Leroy Innes's poetry. And we're going to have a musical interlude now by Stealth Ing. Stealth is a Toronto-based musician, filmmaker, and dance collaborator who's renowned for his music, as well as for founding the Toronto Institute of Music for the Blind. It's an education hub providing blind and or visually impaired people with resources to learn and perform music. You can learn more about the program and about Stealth at www.stelthng.com. Marcy's going to play the audio now of Stealth's wonderful music.
And I'm so sorry, this is the interpreter here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you repeat the website for me?
Sure. www.stelthng.com.
Recurrent screen text link Windows Media Player 1 now playing.
Yes.
On your desk is your one set of headphones and that radio face thing.
Oh, you're undoing the pat.
Wow. Again, that was the music of Stealth Ing, and it was amazing. I got a little avant-garde at one point when someone had their mic unmuted. And so I do want to remind people again to be sure to mute your mics during the presentations. And we're on to our next presentation, coming back from the break. This is a 30-minute interactive chat with Michael Gottiel. And Michael will speak first, and then we're going to open it up for questions in the text and as well in via raised hand. Michael Gottiel is a first in history, the first time in history we have an accessibility commissioner to the government of Canada. Michael's a lawyer, an adjudicator, and a mediator, in addition to now being the accessibility commissioner. And it's such an honor to have Michael here today. And there's so much to talk about with him. Michael will introduce himself, and as I mentioned, then we will open it up to questions as well. So get your questions ready. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. And well, thanks for placing me after Sandia, because that's a tough act to follow. So exciting, so interesting. So important. Community, people with disabilities, empowering each other, empowering ourselves, just a fantastic message. And I guess as a lawyer, I can't even use that as an excuse that my presentation won't be as exciting, but yeah, as a lawyer, I'm going to be speaking about my new role as Accessibility Commissioner. Which I took on in May of this year, 2022. Many of you know the Accessible Canada Act is legislation, federal legislation, a federal law that was passed 2 years ago. And it's another example, another piece of accessibility legislation in Canada. So many of you may know the AODA in Nova Scotia. There's been for years an Accessibility Act. Manitoba has one, BC has one, Saskatchewan just a couple of weeks ago introduced an accessibility legislation into the legislature there. So very exciting times. And that's kind of what I want to talk about. You know, for me, it was really exciting to be appointed accessibility commissioner, quite an honor. My role is to administer and enforce the Accessible Canada Act. And again, as many of you may know, the Accessible Canada Act, what it does, it's actually a framework. So what, like the AODA or other accessibility legislation, the government will pass regulations, standards to remove barriers. So for example, there may be coming a regulation about website and accessible websites that will require all federally regulated businesses and government, the federal government, to comply with WCAG 2.1. There may be regulations about a built environment that all, you know, buildings need to have ramps and accessible washrooms, regulations about employment practices, regulations about services, regulations about procurement. So in other words, if a company or government purchases a service, maybe a web, a program that they or they hire somebody to do some work for them, the company has to commit to being fully accessible. So of course, the Human Rights Act continues to apply. The Human Rights Act says if somebody faces discrimination in an individual case, they can file a complaint with the Canadian Human Rights Commission or one of the provincial human rights commissions or tribunals. But the Accessibility Act is different. Instead of trying to remove barriers one legal case at a time, it tries to, you know, its aim is to remove barriers, prevent the establishment of new barriers across society. And my job is to ensure that companies and government comply with those regulations, those new standards that are, you know, accessible by design or barrier-free standards and so forth. So I think that makes it an exciting time. Now, some people may say, well, you know, as David Lepofsky said earlier, you know, hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities still live in poverty. We know that children with disabilities face a really difficult time finding, you know, accessing equitable education. Seniors and others with disability have a higher rate of abuse and are victims of violence. We know that people with disability have difficult, you know, finding homes or certainly accessible homes. So, you know, one might say, well, what, you know, how, why are we excited? Well, I think we're excited because I think people with disabilities are having a moment. We're having sort of an, what I would call, we're here and we're proud moment. We're, as Cynthia said, we're out in the community and we are taking our place in the community. And you can contrast that, I think, with, you know, not that long ago, 100 years ago, some of you may have heard the phrase, the ugly laws. And these were city ordinances that actually prevented people from disabilities from being in public. They used words like anyone who's deformed, disabled, maimed, or is an object of disgusting form. That's what they called us, right? And said we weren't allowed to be out in public. And that was a criminal sanction. You could go, if be subject to, to jail or a fine. Well, that, those didn't last long, but the next step was to round people up, people with disabilities up, and put them in institutions. Right? They didn't want us in public. They didn't want us being in the land, as Jacobus ten Broek famous article in 1966, the right to be in the world. We weren't allowed that. And of course, there were the periods where there were eugenics or forced sterilization. I know many people with disability are concerned with, medical assistant in dying laws that are going back to a time when people with disability their lives aren't valued. But I think we are in the world, and we are out in the world, and we're taking our place. And there is legislation like the Accessible Canada Act, which is based on the principles of inclusion and based on the principle of nothing without us. And I think before I talk about inclusion and nothing without us, let me just say a couple of things. These are not rights that have been granted to us as people with disabilities. These are rights that people with disabilities have fought for. And of course, the laws don't change. Legislation isn't enacted. The laws change with sometimes with legal battles for us to win our rights. And so we have struggled and fought for these things. These are not things that are handed down from above and that somehow we should be grateful for. We should recognize that we have fought for these things, and where we have won these things, we should be excited and energized and empowered by that possibility. The second thing, I remember when I was in university, I used to have a sticker on my fridge. It said, when somebody says you never had it so good, they're usually somebody that still has more than you do, right? And so when we hear, yeah, this is great, barrier-free inclusion, but not so fast. There are other priorities. Business is coming out of COVID. You've never had it so good, so don't ask for too much. I think we have to understand that for what it is, which is it's the resistance that we have always faced as people with disabilities, that it's easier for society to sort of put us in a situation of where we're taking handouts, as opposed to we are equal members and citizens. And we are getting there, and we have to continue that fight. And it takes time, and it takes, it's a constant struggle. It's not something that you reach and you've achieved and the fight's over. It's always going to be a struggle, and we know how to do that. So let me just talk briefly about the principles in the Accessible Canada Act. And I think some of the principles that people with disabilities, when I say we're having a we are here moment. One of course word we talk about is inclusion, and that's critical for the principle in accessibility legislation. It's critical for a society we envisage where we're not locked away in institutions and that kind of thing. But what's in a word, right? And there's a quote from Alice Through the Looking Glass, Alice in Wonderland, where Humpty Dumpty says, when I use a word, it means exactly what I intend it to mean, nothing more and nothing less. So as we work towards inclusion, we rely on the successes that we've had, and we have legislation that says, the principle is an inclusive, barrier-free Canada by 2040. We have to retain ownership of that word, because inclusion can mean, well, we'll tolerate you, and we'll include you in our society, and maybe we'll do a few tweaks, but just remember, it's our society. It's not your society, it's our society, and we'll include you. That's not the kind of inclusion we want. Secondly, we know that the Accessible Canada Act requires entities to consult with people with disabilities. So I'm not sure who those people are with disabilities. Hopefully includes many of the people online here, but it's this term, consult with people with disabilities. Well, we don't want consultation to mean, okay, you come and talk to us, and then you say, we'll take it under advisement, and then they go away and decide what they want to do. That's not the kind of the way to build an inclusive society. That's not the kind of consultation we want. I should also say on consultation, I've heard a lot from the disability community that said, people come to consult with us and it's like they want free advice. And that's not fair. And in fact, there is more and more movement towards saying where companies and governments have to consult as part of their legal obligation under the Accessible Canada Act, that you got to, people with disabilities aren't doing this for free. In fact, the Canadian Human Rights Commission recently released a draft guideline on compensation for consultation. You should take a look at it on our website. There's also a great platform that's going to be launched called Accessibility Exchange, and developed by Michael Bach, who's been a longtime advocate and disability rights scholars, where people with disabilities and organizations that want to offer their services can register, and companies and government who are seeking consultation, input, can go and link up with people with expertise. So let me just conclude with one other thought on inclusion. I was recently at a conference, the BC Indigenous Disability Network in Victoria a couple of weeks ago. And one of the speakers from a community living organization in British Columbia was talking about belonging by choice. It really resonated with me, right? Yes, we want inclusion, but again, it's not like we want agency in that. And that term for me, belonging by choice, really encompassed a sense of agency. Right? Yes, we want belonging, but on our terms, in the places we want and how we want, not to be told when and where we can be included. And I'm sure there's all sorts of dimensions to that concept, belonging by choice. And I'm going to think more about that, but it really struck me as a very empowering way to think about inclusion. So thank you very much, and happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Michael.
So much, Michael, for your talk. It's been an amazing talk. I really love the conclusion to it, as I'm sure everybody did. And I'm hoping that we can put in the chat the website that you mentioned and a bit more information. So I'll be pasting that into the chat so that people can see. And if it's possible, could you tell us as well what your website is?
It is, well, you can just type in Canadian Human Rights Commission, but I think at www.chrc hyphen CC DP.
Great, great. I think that's very amazing.
Yeah.
And thank you again for such an incredible talk. And we have time for discussion. There are a lot of questions and a lot of raised hands. I think we may want to start, Jonathan, if you don't mind, we had a few questions in the chat. If we could start with a question from the chat and make sure to keep those prioritized as well as raised hands.
Okay, so one of the first questions was what is the job as an accessibility commissioner like? So they're just trying to like get like what is your kind of responsibilities as a accessibility commissioner?
Right. So as I said, the Accessible Canada, well, my job, I guess you could say, is to administer and enforce the Accessible Canada Act. So some of you may be familiar with other, depending on where you are in Canada. In the States, of course, there's the American with Disabilities Act. So it requires certain companies and governments to do certain things, to have accessible websites and so forth. But the Accessible Canada Act does that through regulation. So at this point, the only regulation that's coming into force is for all entities at the federal level, government departments, federally regulated companies like airlines and broadcasters and so forth, banks, to develop and issue accessibility plans, right? Where they set out, first of all, they must do that in consultation with people with disabilities. So their plan has to explain how they consulted with people with disabilities. It must provide feedback processes and must describe how they're going to identify existing barriers, remove them, and prevent future barriers. And those plans for the government will have to be submitted, in the next, by December 31st, so just a few weeks from now. For private sector, federally regulated companies of over 100 people, banks and railways and so forth, on June 1st of next year, 2023, and all other entities, that is with employees between 10 and 99 people on June 1st of 2024. So my first job, the first part of my job, starting December 31st, is to, and I have a team obviously, to look through those accessibility plans and find out, do they comply with the law? Has the organization in developing their plan consulted with people with disability? How have they done that? Those plans must be in accessible format, WCAG 2.1. Are they up on the website in that accessible format? People with disabilities who want those plans to look at those plans in alternative formats have a right to do that. And can ask for that, and there's time limits to provide those. So these are all things that I will ensure, my team will ensure the companies are complying with, and government is complying with, and have they identified barriers and so forth. As time goes on, there will be more regulations. So the government, I think, is going to start consulting on its next regulation, which is on information and communications technology. So, digital platforms and those, and there will be standards about ensuring those platforms, that technology is fully accessible And once that comes into force, I will be responsible for ensuring that companies comply with that. And we'll go out and do audits, and we'll go out and do inspections. The other aspect of my job is there is a complaints process. So if individuals feel that they've been harmed because an entity has failed to comply with one of the regulations, they can file a complaint with my office, and we will investigate. And we have, if a company has not in fact complied, and the person has suffered harm, I can issue a remedy in terms of money or orders to comply. So, but just to be clear, this is only where a person feels they've been harmed because the entity has failed to comply with a regulation. So that's very specific. If people feel that they've been harmed by discrimination, right, where they've not been hired, or and they've experienced discrimination, that still goes to the Human Rights Commission. But I guess my job is as a regulator and to hear complaints.
We're going to start to answer some raised hands questions. I'm going to read one more from the chat, and then we'll move over, and Marcy will answer raised hand questions. From Kate Chung, says, I think the federal government excludes housing from the Accessible Canada Act. Is that correct? We are repeatedly told by federal politicians that housing is only a municipal or provincial issue. Yet we have the National Housing Strategy, CMHC, etc. How can we get action on dealing with the terrible crisis in accessible housing?
I think that's a great question. And I think it can be, for people with disabilities, very confusing because of the federal provincial jurisdiction. I know Indigenous people have for years suffered, and because provinces will say, oh, it's the federal's job, and the federal government say, well, it's provincial responsibility. But it is true that in Canada, legally under the Constitution, certain things are federally are responsible at are within the federal government's authority, and certain things are within the provincial government's authority. And essentially that, it's not precisely, and I'm not giving legal advice, but the rule of thumb is everything's provincial unless it's federal. And the federal things are obviously federal government and services and that sort of thing. And then things like airlines and rail transport and marine transport, all broadcasting and telecommunications, banks, atomic energy, and that sort of thing. So yes, there is, and housing and affordable housing and accessible housing is something that's responsible, that falls within the responsibility of the provincial government. So it doesn't come within my jurisdiction. Having said that, there's a really interesting part of the Accessible Canada Act that's not within my office, but it establishes something called the Accessible Standards Canada. So this is another office that is working to develop standards, which then would become regulations that I would enforce. But the first step is standards, and that includes built environment. Right now, of course, it can only technically apply, the government can only technically make the regulation for federally regulated areas, but Accessible Standards Canada is working with all the provinces and internationally to develop standards that provinces may want to apply just because they make sense, just because there's going to be cross-provincial trade and so forth. And in fact, of course, we know in Ontario, the AODA has been around for years. And maybe, in fact, the federal sphere will adopt some of the standards that Ontario has already put into place. So there is an effort to align the standards, but you're quite right that housing is a provincial matter.
Okay, so we have 3 hands raised. We have Joseph, we have Aaron, and we have Amber. And I'm not sure if we're going to get to all 3 of those, but let's see what we can do. So Joseph, you're first.
Hello, Joseph. This is Joseph Sideros. Thank you for your presentation. My question is regarding digital space. I find that sometimes websites are not labeled properly, links are not labeled properly, they're not clearly labeled, websites are scattered. There's graphics on web pages that are not labeled properly, that have not proper alt text. And sometimes websites, some websites you have to click and you can't use keyboard commands. And that's what I have as the question in terms of digital. How could it be more accessible for blind people and for other disabilities?
Well, thanks for the question, Joseph. You're absolutely right. I get that too when I'm trying to navigate. Ironically, you know, I'm working within the federal sphere, and there's I get forms sent or try to log on to an employee website, and it's not accessible. You know, and I work. So that's so you're absolutely right. But that's, as I said, the next regulation that I expect will come down. Probably won't be for another 18 months or so, but the government will shortly go out for public consultation on a draft standard for information communication technology, including website and digital platforms. So you're absolutely right. It's something that has to be addressed. And from my information, that's the next piece on the horizon.
Hey, Elizabeth, how are we doing? Have we run out of time?
We're at 2:31, but as Anne said, we could probably go over to 2:35.
Okay.
We've got Aaron and we have
Amber.
Amber Lee. Yes.
So Aaron first.
Hi, so my question is between the Accessible Canada, is my microphone coming through?
Yeah, we could hear you.
Okay, my question is with referencing the Accessible Canada Act, but a lot of Canadians seem to follow the Americans with Disabilities Act, even in Canada, because the standards that the American side follows is that they're very specific with measurements. Your doors need to be this wide. The distance from the toilet to the grab bar needs to be this far. The width of the shower needs to be this wide. And this is like specifically for things like accommodations. And there is a flight aspect as well. But I guess my question is there, I know that the Accessible Canada Act is very broad when it comes to these sort of specifics. They don't go into the measurements that allow companies to that almost enforce companies to adopt better accessibility standards. So is something like this coming down the pipe in equivalent to what the ADA may has in their policies?
Yes, I think so. I think you're quite right. And I think the reason for that is the Accessible Canada Act was brought into place, and now there will be a process over the coming years to bring in standards and regulations that are more specific in specific areas. So I hope, and the people and the community of people with disability has to push for more regulations that will be of the kind you're talking about.
Okay, and the last person that had their hand up is Amber.
Hi, my name's Amber Lee, but part of your last statement goes to my question, which would be, is there anything that we would be able to do to support your office in terms of being effective or having stronger teeth? And I say that because I find that frequently on issues of disability, there's a great, in my opinion, pervasive, this is okay to be doing to you. And what this results in is sometimes having to face continuing battles for accessibility that's very challenging and draining. In terms of myself, I'm not gonna state my employer or where I live, but I have a sleep-wake cycle disorder issue. And there was something that was always permitted in the company, which is to work extra hours, to take a time off for a medical appointment. I do have medical appointments that I was taking time off for, and then I was told I had to make all sorts of changes. And while they were aware, there was just an unwillingness, and the unwillingness was just very okay. And so when you are facing a larger institution, whether it is needing to try to say something to a landlord or to an employer, and sort of having to deal with that issue over and over and over, it's very draining. So if there's something that we could do to better empower your office, so some of the issues that we face aren't occupying so much time in our lives, I would like to know sort of like the rollout, because I understood you were saying December 31st, certain things are happening, other things are happening at later times. If there's anything that we could do to be more supportive for your office being effective.
Yes, and to other offices as well. So let me explain. As I said, I'm the Accessibility Commissioner. I'm responsible for enforcing regulations that are in place, but I am also responsible for providing annual reports and perhaps special reports to the minister saying, and part of that could be, well, I've gotten this many complaints and we've done this kind of work, but we get a lot of calls about this, that, or this issue that seems, so there seems to be a gap. But I would also say and encourage you to get in touch with the Chief Accessibility Officer, Stephanie Cadu. So under the Accessible Canada Act, there's my office, but there's also something called the Office of the Chief Accessibility Officer. And currently, Stephanie Cadu is the chief, and she is more of the person who wants to hear from the community, wants to hear where the gaps are, wants to hear people's experiences, because she advises the minister directly, right? So again, Chief Accessibility Officer, I'm not sure what the website is. I know she has a link. She's on LinkedIn because I saw something recently. But she's been out and about. I saw her the other day. She's all over the place speaking, but she wants to hear from people on the kinds of things you're exactly saying, because she's the one who will encourage the minister to move faster on particular issues.
Thank you, Amber, for that important question. And thank you, Michael, Gadiel, and everyone who's taken part in this discussion. I hope it's a discussion that we can continue. There's certainly a discussion continuing in the chat about Michael's presentation and about the Accessibility Commission and federal housing policy. So people can keep going in the chat even through our break and start to connect that way. It is time for our second break. So once again, I want to say thank you so much for Michael
Thank
Gadiel for
you.
being here. It was very, very, very interesting.
Thank you so much.
The break is going to be just under 10 minutes long. During the break, we'll first hear a song by Murray Powell. The song is entitled Accessibility, It's the Way to Go from his 2021 album, Scamp. Michael's music is available at www.footstompingmusic.com. And here he is.
You unmute from the currently using from alt carry mute. Meeting live transmission experiment left. Windows Media Player 1 now play. Speed web.
In Ontario, the only way to go is accessibility. This is a term that everyone should know, accessibility. Now's the time to jump on board. It's a goal worth fighting for. We can't accept less anymore. Accessibility. This is a journey to awareness of accessibility, where everybody benefits from accessibility. Cause changes that we make today help everyone along the way. This is our message for today, accessibility. Should know that inclusion is the way to go. Yes, and accessibility is the path, you know. But so far their progress has been too damn slow. So communities must take a stand for accessibility. It's a collective way to lend a hand to accessibility. Let's talk about our plans and goals. Enable people, young and old. This is a story must be told. Accessibility. So in Ontario, the only way to go is accessibility. This is a term that everyone should know, accessibility. Let everybody jump on board. It's a goal worth fighting for. We won't accept less anymore, accessibility. So let's make Ontario a better place so everybody can embrace accessibility. Yeah. Accessibility for everybody. Accessibility, yeah. Accessibility, oh, accessibility. Accessibility, yes. Accessibility. We need it now, you and me. Hey!
Woo, that was amazing. We're seeing in the chat, people love the song. I'm going to say the name of the song again for anyone who missed it. It's called Accessibility, It's the Way to Go. It's by Murray Powell. And Murray Powell has a 2021 album, Scamp. And you can find his music at footstompinmusic.com. We're going to take a moment. We're going to get started in a few minutes, but I want to tell you a little bit more about our host, our sponsors, and our partners. This event is hosted by the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians, a national charitable organization of primarily blind, deafblind, or partially sighted members. Since 1992, AEBC has advocated for accessibility, equality, and the elimination of barriers in how organizations and businesses deliver products and services across Canada. Their website is www.blindcanadians.ca. We also have 4 major sponsors. The Canadian Council of the Blind is a gold sponsor of this conference. They work to improve quality of life for persons with vision loss through awareness, peer mentoring, socializing, sport, advocacy, health promotion, and illness prevention. Their website is ccbnational.net. The Ontario Chambers of Commerce is a gold sponsor, together with 157 member chambers of commerce and boards of trades and 60,000 members. The Ontario Chamber of Commerce works to foster the growth of Ontario businesses, with an emphasis on accessibility for all in the community. You can learn more about them at occ.ca. Trailblazers Tandem Cycling Club, also a gold sponsor, gives people who are blind, visually impaired, and deafblind an opportunity to cycle with volunteers who are sighted on the organization's tandem bikes. Their website is trailblazerstandem.org. The Canadian National Institute for the Blind, our silver sponsor, is a nonprofit organization driven to change what it is to be blind today. They have a range of amazing programs and have also created an online library of legal information to help people know their rights and navigate provincial legal systems. You can learn more about them at www.cnib.ca. I'm excited also to acknowledge our event partners who have not only shared this event in their communities, but also helped to shape it. They are the Accessible Housing Network, Autistics for Autistics Self-Advocacy in Canada, Baker McKenzie LLP, that's a law firm, Balance for Blind Adults, Canadian Council of the Blind Toronto Visionaries, CCB, Canadian National Institute for the Blind, Ethno-Racial People with Disabilities Coalition of Ontario, ERDCO, Ontario Chamber of Commerce, Ontario Disability Coalition, Trailblazers Tandem Cycling Club, and Wood Green Community Services. Thank you so much to our host, our sponsors, our project partners, and to everyone for being here today and being part of this. We're getting back from our break and we're starting our next panel. This is our last panel entitled Empowerment. I'm going to be handing over the rest of the conference emceeing to our panel monitor, Sarah Saeed. Sarah is a climate justice activist, innovator, and poet from Toronto, who is also currently a volunteer at AEBC. Thank you, Sarah. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this very important panel discussion to spread awareness on International Day of Persons with Disability. As mentioned, my name is Sarah, and I am a climate justice activist. Something that I'm very passionate about is the role of social justice along with climate justice, and that is one of the main reasons that I started to volunteer with AEBC. I am truly honored to be the moderator for today's panel alongside these very influential advocates and change makers today. Today's panel is all about how we can empower ourselves and thrive in this new reality. Today, our panelists will share their advocacy journey, why accessibility is good for all, and how we can improve accessibility and inclusion in various sectors. Our first panelist is Penny Bennett, President of Barrier Free Canada. Our second panelist is Keenan Weller, co-leader and director of communication of Live, Work, Play. And last but not least, our third and final panelist for today is Robert Hansen, who is an accessibility advisor. Thank you so much, Penny, Keenan, and Robert for joining us today. I would like to pass the microphone to each of you to introduce yourselves, starting off with Penny. If you could please introduce yourself to the audience.
Yes, my name is Penny Bennett, previously Penny LeClaire. I am deafblind. I live in Kingston. I've been an advocate for years and years, probably most of my life, starting at about the age of 5 when I screamed and yelled for what I wanted and got it, and realized that the squeaky wheel does work. And so I enjoy advocacy, and I know it's important. And I enjoy working with so many people, so many of you out there over the years that I've worked with and the things that we've achieved. And I'm proud of it as a Canadian.
Thank you so much, Penny, for that introduction. Keenan, if you would like to go next.
Thanks. I've been working and volunteering and advocating in the sector since about 1989. And I guess some of what I do as an advocate that sticks with me the most, I guess, I've been involved with Inclusion International for the last few years, and they do work with the United Nations around the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That, along with the closure of mass institutions for people with intellectual disabilities in Ontario, two of the things that have impacted me the most and guide my thoughts and actions today.
Thank you so much, Keenan. And lastly, Robert, if you could please introduce yourself.
Been doing quite a bit of accessibility and inclusion work with organizations such as the Rick Hansen Foundation, Variety Village, Parasport Ontario, and several others. And basically today I'm going to share a bit more about that, as well as some different sporting possibilities I'm part of.
Thank you so much, Penny, Keenan, and Robert, for those introductions. I'm looking forward to our panel discussion and to hear more about the work that you are currently doing. I think today's panel, it talks a lot about inclusion and accessibility. So I would like to start off with a simple question on what does inclusion mean to each of you? And we'll be going in the order of the panelists on my screen. So same as before, Penny, Keenan, and then Robert. Penny, if you would like to start first, please.
Inclusion to me is not being left behind. It's being able to do what you want to do and what others are doing. Basically, that's my take on the word and the inclusion.
Thank you. I think that could make a very incredible quote on the new definition of what inclusion should mean in Ontario. Keenan?
Yeah, that's a great definition. Hard to top that. I think just being welcoming and giving consideration to the possibilities of everyone who might want to belong. And I think a phrase we use a lot around the workplace is, if you're not deliberately including people, you're probably accidentally excluding them. So that's a thought I like to keep in mind.
Thank you so much. Lastly, Robert, what does inclusion mean to you?
It's basically what you guys have said, that everyone can join in, equal opportunities, but I believe that inclusion also has to do with accessibility. That before you can have inclusion, first you have to make something accessible. So therefore, that's the order that they should come in.
I think that is very important. And it's a great way to jump into our next question. Because as you mentioned, inclusion is accessibility, and accessibility needs to come first. And so one of the topics that was covered throughout today's conference was that accessibility is good for all, just as we have previously seen in the last keynote. And so when I was doing a bit of research myself, I came across this specific term that is the curb cut effect, which is when designs created to benefit those with disabilities actually end up benefiting a much larger group of the population. So I would like to hear why this statement is true, why accessibility is good for all, and possible examples.
Well, it's Penny speaking here. I know that you don't know when you are going to experience a disability. You don't know if you'll have a disability for just a little while or life. So if everything is always inclusive, that means no matter what happens to you, you'll be able to participate, or your friends or your family. And it's just a matter of including everybody. Why wouldn't you? I don't understand why it's not done more often, but it definitely is something that everybody should consider, because we just never know when it's going to strike us, or somebody love, or somebody that we can't often help somebody when there's a whole bunch of stairs and someone's in a wheelchair. There's no solution, is there? So.
Thank you, Penny. I did see in the chat previously that 22% of Canadians have a disability. So it's very important that, as you have mentioned, we don't know what the future holds, and accessibility and inclusion be a top priority on many agendas, especially in housing. Keenan, if you would like to add on to that.
Sure, and I'll go at it from the curb cut effect. It's interesting because that's a physical space analogy, but I'll approach this question from the perspective of people with intellectual disabilities and autistic persons. So one of the interesting developments in working with employers for quite a long time now is some of the work they'll do around accessibility has to do with communications within the workplace. And something we have heard over and over again is other employees coming forward and telling their supervisor or the owner, depending on the type of business, or manager, since you made those changes, this has been so much better for all of us. I was having a lot of difficulty understanding the work that we were doing as a team, or the outcomes and this sort of thing. So that's one quick example. Another is just in general, if I look at, for example, in the community, maybe supporting someone to join a camera club. So there's all sorts of unwritten rules or invisible rules. So a lot of work we've done is to help those types of, it could be a community organization, a theater group, anything. What are the unwritten or invisible rules that you have here? Like, if I show up with this kind of camera, is that inappropriate? How do I meet other people outside of the formal hours of the camera club? Those sorts of things. And so what we found again with the once those were made more visible, more people in the camera club said, yeah, I was wondering the same thing. So that benefited everyone. And I think a last one is just, I think the experience of diversity, equity, inclusion for all of us, when we get to meet more people, different people, they bring perspectives that they have that we don't. And so it just makes all of our lives better. So I'll end on that.
Thank you for sharing that example, Keenan. Robert?
I think there are some other great examples that we can all see in everyday daily life. If we think of audible bus announcements on subways and buses, helps everyone. Maybe you're looking after kids, maybe you're trying to do stuff and you don't know what stop you're at. It's great. Hearing which side the doors are going to open on the subway. There again, if you don't know where they're going to open, you can just listen instead of looking. Even on their iPhones, we've got dictation, and everyone will want to be able to dictate their text, maybe have an essay read back to them, use Siri to help their daily lives. Even indoor navigation, for examples where a colored path along a floor in a hospital, maybe for someone who's visually impaired, but honestly can help anyone to find their way who doesn't know how to get around. So there are so many examples that we can find. You could even think of materials, like print materials aren't going to help everyone. In the electronic format of a fly pamphlet essay will help everyone, whether it's saving time or just ease of reading. Even on websites, we have mentioned earlier today that, yeah, make them easier. If you put less clutter, color contrast, descriptive headings, adjustable font size, photos with description, and text that's easy to find, it's not just going to help us who are blind. It's, yeah, everyone wants easier access to materials.
Thank you so much, Robert. And I completely agree with Keenan. For example, accessibility in the TTC or public transit is something that's very important, and that I honestly did not realize until you had actually mentioned it. So thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'll be moving on now to questions that are more specific to each of what you are doing. And while all of you are accessibility advocates, each of you do work in specific sectors. And so I would like to start off with Penny. And today's conference is all about empowering ourselves. And we heard this throughout today's discussions. But the one way that we can empower ourselves is using the tools that we currently have at our disposal, one of them being advocacy. And there's this one quote that you shared in your bio that I would love to share today. And it is that we have many tools in our toolkit of advocating well, but they are all tools that need some sharpening. So I would like to hear your take on how we can advocate for ourselves in our daily lives.
Well, the one way to sharpen your tool when you're out there advocating is to be an informed advocate. Know everything there is to know about what you're advocating for, and be ready for the kinds of responses we always get, like, well, it's not too bad, which we learned earlier, it means, well, you don't have the disability. So for you, it's easy to say that you've got enough when you don't have everything you should have. So be informed, because that is powerful. And you don't want to be seen as somebody who wasn't prepared, because you will have credibility the more informed you are. That makes your advocacy sharp. It makes you look great. And it's the one way that you can really get people their attention, because that's what you're trying to do. The second tool that you should have is the connection to others, and to make your advocacy stronger by including other people as much as you can. So use your imagination to come up with ways that you can include other people in your advocacy effort. It's amazing sometimes what we are doing alone, but we realize that there's so many people trying to do the same thing that if we'd work together, we would achieve more. So reach out, try to figure out who you can add to your advocacy power little storm of team effort to make it so that your advocacy is stronger.
Thank you, Penny. I resonate a lot about what you said about collaboration, working with other people, especially because when working in advocacy, it's all about, the power of groups coming together and advocating for one common goal. And I see that a lot even in the climate justice space. So I resonated a lot with that. I do have a follow-up question, which is how the power of advocacy and the power of advocacy in terms of people coming together. And I know that you touched a little bit on this, but if you could elaborate a bit more about the power of numbers, you could say.
Well, it's just a given case that most people that are advocating are from a marginalized group. So you do have to come together to make it stronger so that you can make a difference. And a lot of people will see, like, I am deafblind, and I can say I'm deafblind, but sometimes I can include other people that would be helped with the same kind of advocacy I'm asking for. So I can, I'm not just representing deafblind people, and that's powerful. I guess really I would leave it to, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. I appreciate that. Moving on to Robert. The work you've done in accessibility and inclusion is critical in various sectors, for example, in equitable and equal representation in the workforce, but also housing, for example. But this also is very true for recreational activities like sports. You were a competitive swimmer for 17 years, and so I would like to hear your perspective on how the intersection of identities, including those with disabilities, impacts your participation in daily society.
Yeah. So I have had many different identities in my life. When I was 4 years old, I had surgery for a brain tumor and that left me blind. So suddenly I was the kid at school and I was known as the one who was blind. And blindness therefore became my identity. But 4 years later, I decided to do a swim across the lake at a summer camp, which took me 2.5 hours, but the lifeguard there wanted me to be included. So she swam beside me the whole way. And that 2.5 hours later, we finished. There we go, another example of inclusion. And that swim led me to a swim team at a community center called Variety Village. Now I had a different identity as a competitive para swimmer. And I loved that the people didn't see me as different. I was just included in everything and I swam with them. And I just did things a little differently. Next, at the community center where I became an ambassador. And I learned how to talk about myself and explain to others about accessibility and inclusion. So now I was an advocate. Next, I had to learn how to use that skill to be allowed into a fitness and health promotion program at college. And there again, that's because they weren't able to see the possibilities. So eventually I became a student who participated in the same things as the rest of the class. But then it was time to go to work. So again, I guess there were those people who focused on me as someone who is blind. And once again, I had to educate another whole group of people on my abilities. So now I was an employee with 3 different jobs. But the original question was also about my participation in daily society. I participate in the same things as everyone else in our society. And I just, use accessibility and inclusion to make that happen. So to me, it seems like the people around me are the ones who I have to kind of work with each time. And they have to learn more about my abilities and what blindness is. Okay.
Thank you, Robert, for that very inspiring story. There's a lot of comments in the chat saying thank you for sharing this story. And I think the biggest message is that your disability is not your identity. And I really appreciate how you shared your honest story of how you overcame that. And I think a very important takeaway is that in your life, there might be this one person that will really inspire you to continue your passion, which in this case was swimming. So thank you so much for sharing that story. Keenan, I would like to talk about your work as the co-leader at Live Work Play for the past 25 years. In this role, you have been supporting people with intellectual disabilities and autistic persons to be welcomed and included in housing and employment. So I would like to ask as well, what are some key changes, in your opinion, that society could make to improve quality of life for this population?
Sure, a big question. So I'll kind of start in the life cycle. So the school system. Unfortunately, I first worked in the school system, I think, back in 1991. And there's been changes, but there's still quite a lot of focus on special education infrastructure instead of inclusion infrastructure, if I could put it that way. So there's still a lot of segregating of students with intellectual disabilities and autistic students in different ways. But perhaps even more importantly, accountability from the school system for what happens after they leave public school. There really isn't any. So you'll see claims at various school boards, oh, our special education is the best. And you're like, well, why is it the best? What happens after Do people get jobs? Do they go to post-secondary? What occurs? And really, if we dig, not to dig that deep, actually, we find out really, if you were using that criteria, it's mostly a failure. So the experience of those students in our schools is not really positioning them for life after school in an included way. And so that, unfortunately, leads into what goes on in adult services typically. I think Anne shared a statistic earlier from a study in 1918 that said something like about 90% of the resources are still going into segregated outcomes in housing. And it's also very similar in what gets labeled as kind of community support. So everything else but housing, it's probably about 80 to 90% that's guiding people into day programs, or even is very moved by Robert's example. So segregated sports is one of the most disappointing and sad things that goes on. People can do arts and sports. If we can't do arts and sports and things like that together, then we're just not applying ourselves. It just makes no sense. So I've been so encouraged in the Ottawa area in the past couple of years. We have Ottawa Sports and Social Club and Ottawa Rec Sports are two examples of community-based sports organizations. When I first spoke to them, I didn't have to make a case for inclusion. They kept saying, that's what this is for. We want everyone playing volleyball together, hockey together, the whole point of it, and we'll figure it out, whatever it is. And so that's really encouraging to see, but it's still more of a kind of a fringe example than what is the norm. Our municipal sports and recreation is still very invested in kind of segregated sports and recreation, which is really disappointing. So it's kind of, in summary, like we need to do, housing first, community first, employment first. And, if we're streaming people into these segregated programs, then something like employment also is not going to happen for them. Those are not, they may label themselves as transitional or preparation, but they really aren't. You don't learn how to be included in the community by being artificially segregated. This has never made sense. And I will own up to, in the 90s, I was a part of things where I thought, okay, we'll start helping the person learn how to be included in an excluded environment. It makes no sense. I was doing that. Fortunately, it's been 20 years of not doing that, but it's still a matter of routine in our society that we're pretending that you learn how to be included by going off separate from everybody else. So that's number one, is just take head on, stop investing in how we exclude people, and let's invest in how we include them, including, like Robert said, what's the accessibility piece, and let's dig into what it would take for them to be truly included.
Thank you so much, Keenan. I think your point relates to this next question, because as you mentioned, people with disabilities are being marginalized or classified. So I would like to ask each of you that sometimes we don't have sufficient enough data that ensures that people with different disabilities are being represented in different groups, like you had mentioned, Keenan, in housing, for example, or in employment. So in your opinion, what are some ways we can bridge this gap in today's society?
I believe one of the biggest ways to bridge the gap is to continue to show the successes that we have. Where has it worked? How well has it worked? And what's the meaning of it having worked? Because I think a lot of people don't know when success has happened. We don't blow our horn loud enough. We are busy experiencing the success and triumphing, but very few people know about it. So we need to make sure that people know about the successes, how they happened, how the struggle was, and share the road to how did you break through? What did you do? Because it's probably the same tools that could be employed elsewhere. And I once wanted to have access to a public event where the people had money to hire someone to assist me with some sign language, and they didn't have the money. So I got the person to volunteer and then submit a bill after I had been there. And eventually it got put onto the budget of that organization to provide interpretation for deaf people within that community center because they saw what the person did and then provided the budget. So sometimes you have to get very creative.
Thank you, Penny. I appreciate your insights on this question. Keenan?
Well, Penny threw me off because I think something she said, it's more important than what I was planning to comment on. So she mentioned the word success. So especially with our population, but I'm sure every person with a disability, the focus on deficits is just such a massive problem. So I was thinking even of the kind of academic and research community. I know we have some of those folks joining us today. So much of the research, particularly, I think for all disabilities, but for people with intellectual disabilities, autistic person, it's all based on problems. Really, it's about the problems experienced by other people and studying the population to learn more about their problems. And so I think, the focus on successes, there's such a limited amount of research, even as we see more and more people living in homes of their own, having competitive, meaningful employment, being leaders, being advocates in their communities. There's so little known about this, and that's what people learn from. They learn from the stories of the world around them. And so if everything is about deficits, we don't get anywhere. So I think that's really important. More information, more data, more stories about successes. And then I think one last little kind of technical piece. So a lot of the, someone said 22% now is the figure being used for people with disabilities. So that includes an awful lot of individuals and a lot of different classifications. And it can mean people easily getting lost in the shuffle, even when there's really positive initiatives like the Federal Public Service in Canada has committed to hiring 5,000 new people with disabilities. But really, a category that broad, unless we dig deeply, we could just be repeating biases or trends within the disability community and unfairly excluding populations within that. So I think digging a little deeper is really important. But at the same time, I do want to credit the federal government has really taken the approach, even though it doesn't say they have to work at that issue. They are really trying to include employees of many different backgrounds. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Keenan, for your insights as well. Robert?
I'd like to talk about representation in sports. So let me tell you a bit more of my story again. After I went blind, my parents tried very hard to find programs that I could participate in. Most wouldn't accept me, and others were adapted for people in wheelchairs or other disabilities. Variety Village, the place where I swam, opened up a whole new world for me. And after joining a swim team, I realized there were so many sports I could do. I downhill ski in the winters, rock climbing, thing I love to do. Yeah, no fear of heights. Another one of my favorite activities is water skiing. When I want to go for a bike ride, I call the Trailblazers Tandem Cycling Club. And that's a cycling club where people of different visual abilities are paired with sighted captains. Last year I joined a soccer team, go to curling, I've been skydiving, and even race car driving. But I was very lucky. I had parents who supported me in these adventures, and I lived in a big city of Toronto with more opportunities. And even then, it could still be difficult to find things that I wanted to do. Every person should have access to the sports they want to participate in. In 2016, an organization called the Ontario Parasport Collective was formed, including Variety Village, Parasport Ontario, the Ontario Blind Sports Association, Ontario Wheelchair Sports Association, the Canadian Paralympic Committee, and 14 other organizations are all part of this. The goal of this program is to give greater access to sporting opportunities for all Ontarians. with a disability by 2025. They want more people participating in parasport programs with opportunities at local, provincial, national, and international levels. They basically want more funding for these programs and more celebrations of achievement. This will bridge a huge gap in sporting opportunities across Canada as organizations begin to participate and follow along with this goal. So that's some of my ideas.
Thank you so much, Robert. I think the main point, or one of the points, since there were many incredible points presented throughout your answers, one of the points is that we need to share our success and celebrate our success even more. So in talking about success, I would like to ask each of you to please share one success story, one success story in your journey to date.
Well, it's a hard choice. But when I had cochlear implant in order to hear again, I was only allowed one implant, and being a deafblind person, one implant just gave me sound from one ear. I had no directional sound. I had no ability to travel because that would be unsafe. So I applied for a second and told, no, you can only have one. In Canada, adults can only have one implant. I applied 3 times, I persisted, and the end result is that all deafblind people in Canada now can have 2 implants. So that's a success story. It was based on persistence. It was based on a safety issue, and I knew it was right.
Thank you so much, Penny. That is a very important success story. And I love how you mentioned perseverance is key. So thank you so much. Keenan?
Wow, that's hard to follow. So I will say it would start with a conversation we had at Live Work Play about 7 years ago. I think our employment team at the time was 3 people. And we were looking at being in Ottawa and the federal public service being just a massive employer. And of course, we hadn't supported anyone to get a job there. And we thought, well, it's because obviously it's office jobs mostly. And historically, people with intellectual disabilities and autistic people, they don't get office jobs. We said, well, let's try anyway. And we started building just grassroots conversations with HR managers and a retired public servant named Mary Casella, used to work for the Canadian Rights Commission, and built it slowly, but within about 5 years, it ended up that more than 100 people had really good jobs with the federal public service working in office environments. And if you would have asked me at the time of that first conversation, is that possible? I would have said that'd be ridiculous. And now it's over 150 people, and it's just incredibly life-changing. It's something I find hard to believe that it's happened at the same time as I know it's only the beginning. So it's a great start, and now we just have to build this into not only that one massive workplace, but workplaces all across our community, and just make it a normal hiring practice, because the best part of it is all the positive feedback we get from hiring managers and coworkers and assistant deputy ministers and everybody else saying, this is one of my favorite things I've done as a federal public servant, is being a part of this project. So that's one of my favorite success stories.
Great. Thank you, Keenan. Wow. That's a very inspiring accomplishment. Thank you so much for sharing. Similar to what Penny had mentioned, how perseverance is key, I like how you mentioned as well that there is still more work that needs to be done and that you are still continuing that work. And I think that's very important. Robert?
Yeah, my success story again has some perseverance, but it was when I went to go to college. I mentioned earlier, it was fitness and health promotion, and they basically said, we can't make it accessible for you. How are you going to assess clients, watch moves in videos, or assess by watching, basically, would be another one. And how are we going to make everything accessible for you? And how can we make this work? Because we can't make changes. So I went in there, started slowly, took 1 or 2 courses, showed them that it could be done, educated the instructors along the way, and by the end of the course, I was doing everything that all the other students were doing, and the professors and teachers actually said to me that I had managed to change their minds about people with visual impairments, and they now have a more open perspective for future students wanting to go in. And even since that time, they've actually had me speak to further classes about my success in the program. So that's one story I can share.
Thank you so much, Robert, for sharing that as well. It is truly inspirational to see how you created sort of that ripple effect that now changed the perspectives of the teachers and the colleagues at the university. So thank you so much for sharing that. I would like to now ask our final concluding question that I hope will end on a positive note. The work that you are doing is much necessary and needed. Advocating and trying to make the system more diverse and inclusive takes dedication and perseverance that has been highlighted throughout all your success stories. I want to share a quote from Robert's bio that I think will conclude our panel discussion very well. And it is, "Never tell me something is impossible. I think if you want to do a thing badly enough, you can find a way. When someone tells me I can't, it usually makes me want to do it even more." I would like to highlight, and just how each of you all have mentioned, that is, change is possible, but that can only happen by taking action. So how do each of you stay motivated to continue the work you do each and every single day? Because as you all have mentioned, it is a bit of a challenging journey.
I have always looked to the past accomplishments that I've achieved when I start to get a little overwhelmed and things aren't working with the current advocacy role. So my past, because I've achieved a lot in my whole life, I have achieved a lot, but it's when you first start, when you don't have that past, then you have to look at somebody that you believe you could walk in their shoes. And if you can believe in somebody and you can believe that you also can do what they have done, given that you've seen them struggle and overcome, then you have to go with that person. Then when you do get some strengths of your own, that is what's going to propel you and keep you motivated. And even today, the stories that I've heard from other people have got me all fired up all over again. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Penny, for sharing that. I am sure the audience is also very inspired by the work that you are doing, and they might as well start their advocacy journey as well. Keenan?
That's great, Penny. Okay, well, start with sort of the yin and yang of motivation. So on the kind of the angry side of it, I mean, the world's still not a very fair place. So you wake up every day and what's something I can do to make it a little more fair? So I think you've heard from all of the speakers and panelists, there's an element of, social justice, and probably every single person here, it's something they think about a lot. And so I think that will just continue motivating me. I want to leave the world a more fair place than what it was where I came into it. And but on the more, the positive side of motivation, it's just seeing people realizing goals and dreams. And sometimes it takes a really long time. I'm thinking of a person I've been involved in their life for about 20 years and ended up, as sometimes happens to people, in a very institutional setting and stuck in a hospital setting and being told having their own apartment, having a job, all these things were impossible. And I can't even process what that would be like, hearing those messages. And that person has their own apartment and is employed and, is posting happily on Facebook and whatever stories of their day, and looking back at where they were, what they were trapped in, and where they are now, and just reminding myself how important it is to be in this fight and what it really means in real terms for how a person's life can go from just about the worst you can imagine to their is full of joy in the same kind of struggles that I am with life, not the kind of hopelessness that they were struggling with before.
Thank you so much, Keenan. Robert?
Yeah, I feel very lucky because through the Rick Hansen Foundation, Variety Village, and other charities, I've had the opportunity to speak to hundreds of school groups. And I love watching the change that happens as I talk. The students have astute questions and open minds. And I find that young people have no problem understanding that we need to have a society where everyone is included. They will grow up knowing that we can remove barriers, which they can help with, and that we will make a world that's more accessible. Their ideas, their motivation will continue the process, which has already begun. And that's what motivates me.
Thank you so much, Robert, for sharing that. I think you say a very similar thing to what, as Keenan mentioned, how in Keenan's story about the employers, once they start to include people who are disabled and include accessibility, they realize the importance of it. And just like you, Robert, had mentioned, from a younger age, you were sharing that story with younger people to let them know that inclusion is very important. So I am hopeful that the future generation as well will also continue this fight for accessibility, and that today and tomorrow's future will be better and accessible for everyone. That brings us to the end of today's panel discussion. Thank you so much, Penny, Keenan, and Robert, for answering all the questions, sharing your insights, and representing the very motivational success stories. So thank you so much. We will now be having time for question and answer. And if we don't have that many questions, I do have some extra questions of my own. So if there are any questions in the chat, I'll be taking a look right now. And I do see that there is one hand raised. I believe we can start with the hand raised right now. Joseph?
Thank you, all three of you, for your great panel. My question is, I'm wondering if the world could create a database for different disabilities, several databases based on people's experience. So the people with disabilities, their experience and their strategies and resources to help other people.
Keenan, I think this question might be directed to you. I know you have a lot to do with the data aspect.
Wow, that's amazing. I think in some ways that is what various people are working towards with various different initiatives. I'm thinking of Inclusion International's work. They just came out with, well, I'm going to get the order of it's Listen, Include, Respect, or Listen, Respect, Include. My head's full of ideas, but they worked on a project like that, and there's actually some work at coming out of Carleton University as well. I'm going to be on a panel with them in January talking about this topic. It doesn't exist yet, but I love the idea, and I think it exists in little pockets and in different communities. And if we could bring it together and make it more visible, it'd be super powerful. Great question.
Thank you, Keenan. Penny, Robert, would you like to add anything?
I don't know of anything specifically that's out there that does that kind of thing, but I do think that just sharing stories more gets the word out there. And we need people to go for whatever they wish to do, not what other people have done. If there's something you want to do, you know, I heard a term just the other day that said that you do it yourself accommodation. We first start doing it ourselves, accommodation, and then once we figured out we can do it, then we go for the real accommodation that we need the next time we do it. So, you know, you have to give it a try and do a little bit of work on your own, and then go for what you need to actually do it on a regular basis.
Thank you so much, Penny. Robert?
I think both of them said that very well, to be honest.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Anne, I see that you have your hand raised as well.
Yeah, my question, I think is for Penny and Keenan in your work, and as well for Robert, in terms of dealing with making change in policy, because I'm in policy work as well, and advocacy as well. Policy advocacy can really, it's a lot of, I would say, kind of getting there. They try to slam the door in your foot, and then you stick your foot in the door so that they don't slam it. You get in a little bit farther. Somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was Michael, saying that, a lot of times governments will also want to consult, and they'll do a huge consultation, and you'll fill a giant survey out, or you'll go to a support, these groups to talk about it, or they might invite you to their office to talk about it. I love that Michael's talking about people actually getting paid to do that. That's a great new model. But you do a lot of consulting and going into the offices and dealing with the policymakers, but many times the pace at which things are moving are so much slower than the vision that we have for how things could be. So it's a question, I guess, for all of you. How do you cope with the disappointments, and how do you manage or how do you celebrate the small victories? And what's your big picture look at what accessibility might look like in the future and the steps that we're taking towards it? So I guess what I'm asking for is some words of hope and resilience to kind of help us all through this advocacy challenges around housing and school and employment. What are your thoughts?
Well, Penny, I would say, first of all, anytime that you can have a face-to-face conversation rather than trying to do things in writing, it speaks volumes. If you can possibly meet, so do your research and try to meet with the best person you possibly can. And then in that meeting, if you can make an impression. As far as staying motivated and putting up with the frustration, I guess you just have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that it isn't just nice. What you want is what you really need and what other people need. It's not about you. It's about all people. You are not fighting just for yourself. You actually are fighting for all of us. Every time you pick up a stone and throw it and try to make some kind of a mark, you are doing it for not just yourself. So maybe that can be motivating, because it is the truth.
Well said. I want to address I think the accountability piece, because it goes to a lot of what Anne said around policy, around consultation. So I've become increasingly narrow and blunt in my focus when asked to participate in these sorts of things, or even if not asked to participate, which is what is the actual change going to be? If you do this, if more people aren't living in quality housing, if more people don't have jobs, if more people with disabilities aren't leading organizations, then you failed. And so it's fine, like most of the policies, they are using all the right words right now. The issue is, are we delivering on change? I look at Ontario, there's a massive strategy of affecting a $2 billion system. It's called Journey to Belonging, and it's got lots of nice words. And I just keep asking, but what is the change we're going to see? And how will we know that we've seen it? Because to me, that's all that matters. That document is the same as one I saw 15 years ago from a different government. I don't care. I want the promise of what the change is going to be, how we're going to know, and what we're going to do when it doesn't happen. So that would be my short answer to that. But if you're going to get, invited to these things, I mean, don't be abused. I mean, be clear. What is the outcome? First of all, what's the outcome of this going to be? Is there going to be transparency? Are you going to say that we consulted Anne Borden and this is what she said, and you're powerless to say, well, I didn't say that. That happens. But then I think the second piece is this going to lead to an expectation of change that can be measured? Because if not, what's the point?
Robert, would you like
I
to
think
add
there's
anything?
one other small little point is, yes, there are the policymakers and the politicians, people making the change or trying to help make change, but together we all have to work together. And if we can educate as many people as possible, one at a time, 100 at a time, whatever, even having this conference today, I'm sure a few more of you have been educated. So let's all kind of work together and raise as much awareness as possible.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that question, and the panelists' very insightful answers. There is one question in the chat from Castantino. I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong. And this question is directed to Robert. Previously, Robert, in one of the answers you gave, you mentioned the Ontario Parasport Collective. Is that different than the Parasport Ontario? And please share the website address.
Yes, the Ontario Parasport Collective is different. Parasport Ontario is basically coordinating games, raising awareness, and running different groups, whereas the collective is trying to bring all these groups together to under one umbrella to give basically basic standards and come up with new policies. As far as a website, I don't have that here, but I could email it after we're done to whoever could post this in here. We can arrange that.
Okay, thank you so much. There is another question in the chat. I am trying to find it. It was shared previously. Apologies for the delay. Yes, so what can a parent do if the school system is denying a transfer a student with autism? I apologize. When a new chat comes in, it goes automatically down.
To the bottom.
I saw the question. I believe it is, what can a parent do if an autistic child has been excluded from the mainstream classroom to advocate to get them returned to a mainstream classroom instead of a segregated classroom?
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, well, probably Anne's one of the best people to answer this, but first of all, don't go it alone as a parent. So whatever jurisdiction you're in, and don't be rushed, and don't go to a meeting with 14 people and you're there by yourself. Get help. Insist on bringing that help and engaging that help with you. Get things in writing. I think one of the key first steps I've seen is requiring the school board to present on paper a rationale for their decision. You need to queue up all the information for why they are making the decision, and then you are positioned to challenge it. So unfortunately, a lot of what I've seen happen is a parent arrives at a meeting with 14 professionals, and then words are said, they create minutes, and it gets announced that this or that has been agreed, and the parent is going, oh, that's not what I thought was happening. So you need help. You should have support, and to get things in writing so that you can fairly challenge them, because sometimes it may become a legal process. But I think that's my key piece is don't go it alone, and seek out advice and support from organizations in your area who will be there to help you.
Thank you so much, Keenan. And as Amberly had mentioned in the chat, 1,000%, or I think a bit more than 1,000, a lot of zeros. But thank you so much for that insightful answer. Do we have any other questions in the chat, or please feel free to use the raise hand feature to ask your question. All right. In the meantime, while you might think of a few questions, I would like to ask a question to each of you. That is, what is one of the biggest mistake that you might have made or that you have seen someone else make in this advocacy journey? And what did you learn from it?
I can jump in, Robert, here.
Okay, thank you.
I think the biggest one I see a lot of people make is honestly negativity. If you're negative and you're, let's say, putting people down or talking badly about groups, organizations, it's going to get back to them. So be positive. It's going to take time, and go with the flow is basically what I say. Yes, make your change, but stay positive.
Thank you so much, Robert.
I would
Penny?
say, oh, go ahead.
Okay.
No, Penny for sure.
I would say that when you're told you can't do something or you're not being accepted, it isn't you that's being rejected, it's your disability. I felt rejected at first until I've learned that you are seeing my disability, and that is what you are rejecting, not me personally, because if you knew me personally, you would never, ever reject what I want to do.
That is beautifully said, Penny. Thank you so much. Keenan?
Wow. Well, definitely the biggest mistakes I made, I think I referenced earlier some of the things we were involved with in the 90s, but you know, it was really accidentally positioning the issue as you know, people with disabilities not having what they need to be included, and of course it is not their fault. There is nothing wrong with them, and so if the community is rejecting them, the answer is not to create something elsewhere so that they can fit in, and a lot of that was going on then. We don't do that now, but it still goes on in society, and so just have to I think because of all the mistakes I made, and I talk about them whenever I present or talk to other organizations, that yeah, we made a lot of mistakes, and one of them was like thinking we had some superpower to fix it by just moving people out of the community and then building something for them where they could be properly included. This is totally wrong, and the community is at fault and often just needs help. I want to be really clear that since changing our perspective some 20 years ago, having better conversations with community venues, it's really mostly a story of success and not rejection. Though certainly there are some places where they need a lot more work with bias and discrimination than others, but it's mostly a success story. And a lot of it is just the fear of the unknown. People don't know what they don't know, and they need to have understanding and conversations.
Thank you so much, Keenan. I like how you mentioned towards the end that there's still more work that needs to be done. I think we do have time for one last question. Joseph, I see that your hand is up. If you would like to please ask your question.
Yeah, this is Joseph again. I'm wondering if there's any guidelines or training or strategies for employers and education, because I feel like there's lots of ignorance for disabilities how to accommodate. So I wonder if anybody is working on a project to improve that in terms of awareness.
I will go because for sure that's something I kind of work on every single day. So there's a couple of groups, Ontario Disability Employment Network and Canadian Association for Supported Employment, and they're easy to find if you Google ODEN or CASE, Canadian Association for Supported Employment. They are both working on those kind of projects all the time, and then you can find within there organizations like ourselves that are doing so locally, and it's a real treasure trove if you go to those websites and just start digging in.
Thank you, Keenan. Penny, Robert, would you like to add anything?
Not for me, thank you.
Okay.
No.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer, Keenan. I think we have time for one more question, which is perfect because Okello has his hand up. Please feel free to unmute and ask your question. Okello, would you like to ask your question, please? We'll come back to you, Okello. Maybe there might be some technical difficulties. Amber Lee, you have your hand up. Please feel free to ask your question.
I was only going to say something briefly while Akello might be working out the mute function. It was to reiterate what was said by Keenan on going into a corporate meeting and ensuring that some notes are taken for your purposes. It is something that has come up in a group that I'm a member of called Good Company. They're people on the spectrum. We very naively have gone into those meetings. We very naively have believed the truthful statement said would be recorded, and we very much all came out with the outcome that seemed to very intentionally bury every wrongdoing, and then unfortunately worse, included a lot of things that didn't actually take place in the meeting that would essentially remove the need for accommodation. And yeah, that's a lesson. So I just wanted to underline it further for people, the importance of having some sort of note taking that you're also a member of if you're having those types of meetings for some form of accountability in the end. And I find that the presence of accountability is usually the absence of discrimination. It's unfortunate.
Thank you, Amber, for sharing that insight and reiterating as well and adding to what Keenan had mentioned. If there are any additional questions, please feel free to let me know or write them in the chat. And are we good for time or should we be wrapping up?
I think Joita is gonna hop back on at 3:55. So we have just about 3 or 4 minutes to thank everybody and wrap up, and then Joita will be back on with the radio.
Okay, well, that is incredible. Thank you so much, Penny, Keenan, Robert, for joining me and the entire conference. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. It was very valuable to hear from your experiences and all your advice. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're just about to wrap up, and I think we'll be hearing from Joita in a few minutes. People want to put their ideas for next year's conference into the chat, or you can raise your hand, or you can send an email. We're also on Twitter. Let me tell you what our Twitter is. It is, oh, I'm looking it up. The Twitter handle is at IDPD Canada. So you can reach us that way as well, or you can reach us through the AEBC as well, if you have ideas for speakers or anything else to do. We also will have a recording of the conference available on the website. There's a YouTube channel that the AEBC has a YouTube channel. So if you want to look at that, you can find a video of the conference that'll be up in like the next few weeks or so. I put the link to the YouTube channel into the chat as well, so you can see. But otherwise, you could Google Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians on YouTube, and you'll be able to find the AEBC YouTube channel there as well, and you can watch video of the conference.
It's a real simple link. It's youtube.com/blind Canadians. All one word. Very simple. Someone was thinking when they set that up.
Definitely. Well, thanks again to everyone who contributed to this conversation. It's been such an amazing afternoon. And we're going to be wrapping up with Joita, and then we'll be thinking already and planning ahead for next year.
Thank you, Anne. It's great to be with you today. It's been an amazing, wonderful, inspiring afternoon. And it's not been my first time hosting this conference. I've done this for a couple of years now. And honestly, it just keeps getting better. I want to start out by thanking a number of people who've made this afternoon possible. Starting out, of course, with Anne Borden, our wonderful moderator who's kept us all on our toes. Our superb panel monitor, Sarah Saeed, as well as all the speakers and panelists who were so generous with their insights, advice, and strategies that we will all take with us moving forward. International Day of Persons with Disabilities is an important occasion for all of us as people with disabilities, but it is one day on the calendar, and I am confident that each and every one of us in our own way will continue to think about ways to advocate and empower for people with disabilities all year round and to keep the conversation going. It's been so exciting to see the chatter in the chat, of course, and to have all of your questions. And I hope that that dialogue will continue 365 days a year. I want to also extend a very warm thank you to our captioner, Denise, I believe, and our interpreters today, Alex and Savannah, who have made it possible to provide accessibility options to many people attending today's event. My warmest thanks and our warmest thanks to everybody from the Alliance for Equality for Blind Canadians and their partners for putting this conference together. In particular, I'd like to shout out the small but mighty organizing team who have made a tremendous effort to pull this afternoon together. I'd like to recognize on behalf of the Alliance for Equality of Blind Canadians, the many sponsors who have made this afternoon possible. The gold sponsors are Baker McKenzie LLP, the Canadian Council of the Blind, Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and Trailblazers Tandem Cycling Club. Our silver sponsors are the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, which is, of course, CNIB. And you heard, of course, from Anne that there are many important partners scattered across the community who have not only spread the word about this conference, but also made it possible to share with our networks about the great work that's happened here this afternoon. I'd like to also recognize the technical team that's made this afternoon's AMI audio live broadcast possible. Our technical producer is Grace Schofield. Our manager for live production is Paula Deneen. Marketer for marketing and communication is Janice Davidson-Pressick. The manager for AMI audio is Andy Frank. And of course, you heard that the recording will be made available as a YouTube on AMI on YouTube/Blind Canadians, but you can also find the podcast on the AMI Audio Live podcast feed. So you've got a couple of ways to go back and check out the conference if you missed some of it and want to get caught up. I am delighted to have been a part of this, as I am every year. I've been your host, Joita Gupta. Thanks so much for listening. Happy International Day for Persons with Disabilities. And until next year, everybody stay strong and dream of a more accessible, inclusive future for all. Thanks a lot. For those of you listening on AMI Audio, coming up next, The Globe and Mail Show. Stay with us.